Welcome back to Follow the Rabbit. I'm Igor, this is Johannes, and we'll be recording a new episode of our Garage Door Up Research Institute / let's see where this is going project. And in the last episode, we ended up on the interdisciplinary kind of strength of the Black Mountain College, one of the exhibitions that stayed with us, I think, the longest. It was a couple of years back, and Große Hamburger Bahnhof here in Berlin. As usually, we'll be diving into another aspect of this topic that we've been researching for a while now. It all started with the essay Life After Lifestyle, but it has now a life of its own, as it was intended, I think. And Johannes will be diving into a new kind of like tree branch of this, and we'll be having a conversation, and let's see where this is going. So welcome back, and let's dive in.
Yes. Take your seat.
Strap on.
And strap on. So as Igor just mentioned, this is where we left off, looking at Black Mountain College, which has always been an inspiration due to his interdisciplinary approach, bringing a lot of different ideas, perspectives together and see what comes out of that. And interdisciplinary as just another way of saying holistic. And speaking about holistic, today I want to look a bit further into holistic approaches, but from a very practical perspective. Because I've experienced a couple of those concepts we've been talking about for the last episodes when it comes to third places and spaces that are hard to define in just one category. And so before we go into that, I quickly want to introduce you to the difference between positive and negative futures. Because in our foresight practice, we've come about this topic a lot without people knowing. So a lot of people go out and think they talk about a positive, inspiring future, not understanding that what they're actually presenting can be considered a negative future. So there's a difference between negative and positive futures. The prime example for a negative future is the car-free city. And that might be something where you're like, wait, what? Why is a car-free city a negative future? I think it's a really positive future. That's right, but by framing it that way, we take something away, it's a reductive future, it immediately produces pushback. And so this can be considered a negative future. And we see this in public discourse that whenever it comes to a topic like the car-free city, it instantly gets maybe not toxic, but controversial.
No, toxic is. I think toxic is the right word.
I wanted to be nice to the SUV drivers.
I mean, we live in Berlin. I think we can go ahead and say it became toxic.
Yeah. So because instantly, like, car drivers feel like, oh, they want to take something away from my freedom. We can't allow that. But what we recommend is always like framing it. So what will this future lead to? I mean, in the example of a car-free city, really, like, if you like, what will a car-free city make possible, will produce? It is like the center of a city that is a very public space, again, that is not dominated by cars, that is not dangerous, where children have a lot of room to play, where you can sport events can happen, cultural events can happen, people can just spend time there because it's not noisy, it is not full of smog and things like that. So this is a very different way to describe a city. It basically is the same idea, but you can frame it negative and positive. And I make this slight detour because today we want to talk about a city that we've been working with over, I think, the last almost like 6 to 7 years.
Yeah.
That had that conversation very much, and where this insight actually comes from. It's the city of Karlsruhe. It's in south of Germany, not like south, but like the
Middle south.
South Germany, something like that. West Germany. It's a very green city, and it is a city that in the last years even put their public transport below the city center, so they now have a city center that is only used by pedestrians and bike riders, and so they have a lot of these conversations.
Don't tell it to Elon Musk.
Oh, he wants. I think he wants to build a hyperloop then. So for them, it's really interesting, like what happens in this now car-free and even public transport-free. It's not public transport-free; it's below the surface, but in this new space where city life can happen. And the topic of third places comes up a lot in discussions with people from the city, and that actually has a long tradition in Karlsruhe. So. Just so you know, I used to live in Karlsruhe for 4 years. Wrote my diploma for my first study there, and lived with a collective, or joined a collective there. So I think from 2005 to 2009, I lived in Karlsruhe, and I was part of a collective called Cubic that ran a space, or like an initiative called Noon. And that was a lot of the things we've described in the last couple of episodes of Follow the Rabbit. We actually prototyped or experimented with when we worked there and did the space.
Johannes, I need to interrupt. I think I would enjoy watching you explain the word noon in English.
Well, the easiest translation is now. It can also be described as currently,
but it's also like it's a very German kind of.
It's a very German
kind of word, in the sense that it's both kind of like a very defined, but also like an expression of a certain state of mind. Almost like it's something you say, kind of like almost like very as a side note, but it does kind of like take up a lot of like that space that you. Of the intention is with you that you explain. So it's kind of it's a really great name.
Yeah, and it's also like this. I think it is very much about the immediately next thing happening. It's like it's what happens now, and that's like I think a good description of like the connotation of Noon. As you can see here, that it is a space in the east part of the city. It was mostly a cafe, but connected with other ideas for that. But the important thing is, and that we, as you heard us talk about before, right now we have a new interest in spirituality. And we saw that with like gyms going more into like offering like spiritual or ish services, from meditation to breath work and things like that. We already had that in the middle of the 2000s, coming from mostly a more Christian background. Like most of the people in this collective had like evangelical backgrounds, like based especially on like postmodern approaches. We always ask ourselves, so how can we have a more like current, like in the present way of living spirituality and expressing religion that is not based on old tradition and rituals, but that actually creates new one. So we deconstructed like how does a worship service work, and put much more like art and rituals into that again. But it started from a spirituality point of view, but then really asked like, how can we be much more part of the neighborhood, of the people around us, not so much separated, but much more included in the neighborhood. And out of that came the idea to like form a cafe, like a classic third place. Like when I lived there, I spent a lot of time at this place because it was really for me like between work and my flat, that was the space where I spent time, where I met the friends from the collective and the neighborhood. But it also was not just a cafe where you could go to eat and drink something. It was also a space where, for example, a concert would be happening. And that actually is still going on today. So as of today, it still is a concert space. But we would combine all of these things. Like, for example, one of our approaches was to always really take care of the artists playing there. So to like give them really good food, give them a nice place to relax, really make sure that they feel comfortable. And that worked so well that at a certain point, bookers would call us and ask, so I have this really big artist here who could usually would never play at a small place like yours. But I know if I have him play a concert at your place, he's going to actually be like really like refreshed for his tour. Like if I send him to you, it's like sending him to a spa place to recover.
#wellness.
Yeah, #wellness, exactly. And so we always try to combine all of these things around you. Back then, nobody really said community, but that was where we're going. We also did a lot like Weave parents web markets already. So we prototyped a lot of these things. And the reason that I tell these stories from back then is that the people who came out of this collective starting or continue to create these spaces and movements in the city themselves. And so going back to Karlsruhe as a city, now that they have these very pedestrian focused inner city, there are new spaces opening. And an interesting combination here, or an interesting other aspect that comes in that like brings us back to Black Mountain colleges. Karlsruhe has one of the most prominent universities in Germany, the KIT, the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. That's very also in the east part of the city, and it's very close to the pedestrian inner city zone. And they have this space like right at the beginning, like this is where the pedestrian zone, pedestrian only zone begins. And they have this space, and they said, we want to be more involved in the city. We want to have more exchange. We want to be more open to the city as a scientific institute. And so they got people that actually came out of the Noon and the Kubik Collective to run this place. And they opened a space called Triangle Open Space. And this is actually from the official opening of that space. This over here is the mayor of Karlsruhe, and a couple of others. These are, I think, like the heads of the university. Talking about that, this space is really interesting because it brings a lot of different ideas together. So as you would expect, it has a cafe. It's just a place where people can come. It's a vegan cafe, so they can have good, healthy food, good coffee. That's actually roasted by my old flatmate. And then they not only have a coffee, they also have different spaces in that triangle building. They have like a lab for scientists to work in, but they also have an event space. And as you can see, these spaces are all connected. So the idea is not like everybody's doing his own things, but that they come together and have a lot of exchange. So for example, they have like public presentations and discussions with people. They use the place, the Kronenplatz it's called, for festivals, events, big lectures, and you can just go there to work. Once again, we have this merging of work and leisure time and everything in between. And it is a space where not only society and science meets, but also the industry comes together. And it's really funny because I think there's a lot of spaces in Germany where science and, for example, industry wants to come together, where like new startups can be founded and things like that. But there is few spaces that really combine well with like the society or the public of a city. And so like the last year they had 275 events around this space, and it was everything from a festival around Reallabore like these really like in life experiments, to networking events, to something like Vinyl Wednesday, or like a like markets where you can sell and swap stuff. So it's a lot of very different things coming together in one space. And this for me is a really fascinating aspect, because we're talking about holisticness. I don't know if it is even a word, a lot. But this idea that we dissolve these borders between these different entities. And I think this is one of those spaces where you can see this really well, that it's not about like inside outside, or you have your part, I have my part, but these borders are dissolving, and it's even I mean, they now have the problem that they have to give invoices for a DJ to the university, and the university is like, we don't know how to pay for a DJ. But that's like the new challenge they have, because
Very, very German sentence.
yeah, bureaucracy. So, and it's interesting, like Igor, like we talked about that. On the other hand, the examples we gave in the last couple of episodes were really about like members club or gyms who like branch out and bring different aspects inside, and basically dissolve the very fixed concept of what is a gym, what is a members club, what is a co-working space. These dissolve, but usually you have to pay to play in a certain way. Like you have to pay a membership card. And I find it interesting that I mean, they also, like in Karlsruhe, they also have co-working spaces, and you can rent a room for a workshop or something like that. But there also are parts where you can just sit there. You can just sit on this plaza. They're just trying to come up with some new concepts to provide shading, because Karlsruhe is also like a southern German city. I think it's the second sunniest city in Germany. So they have to think a lot about heat in the city, and how do they provide shade. So you can just sit there, or you can just pay for a coffee and sit in the cafe. So there are different levels and tiers of access that I find really fascinating, of where we're going, like this dissolving of these borders, or like different levels of hierarchy. What do you think?
For sure. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not just a communist utopia where people are not working and just hanging out. No. Jokes aside, I think like I took 2 notes actually, like during your conversation, because you said like back then people didn't actually say that much community, and I kind of like wrote down that saying community less often but with more intent. I think the word was used, but it was used in a vastly different way. And I think there is something about it that a lot of those spaces are now trying, or communities, just ideas emerging, are trying to give certain words a new intent and a new meaning. One that is not just rooted in some kind of like digital experience where you are fleeting by and you subscribe to this new service with I mean, right now you don't even have to subscribe to new services. You just kind of use Apple ID something and you instantly are in that service. So there's kind of like, it's easier and nicer, but at the same time it doesn't mean anything to you now. You don't even have to come up with a new password. It just kind of like gives you an entrance. And so while convenience is higher, the kind of relationship, the kind of friction that we sometimes build into experiences are actually something worth making them worthwhile. And I think that is at the root of a lot of those things, like that, making it worthwhile. And another thing, we both were in London just a while back, and shout out to John Wilshire, who gave us a tour through the Somerset House, and also explained like the roots of it. I don't want to bastardize the history of a famous building in London, but I think the kind of point was that there wasn't that much public space in the inner city, and the idea was to kind of like basically give that really gigantic plaza and place to the public, and kind of experience what would happen in that regard. So I think like the point here is like we're going through waves.
Yeah.
And I think that's a new wave of both cities and private money kind of trying to figure out what is actually happening. Like, how do we provide new opportunities? And as you said before, like, it's also about figuring out how do we talk about the fact that in bigger cities, there is so much more space available. And I think the positive way of reframing this kind of is there is availability, there is opportunity, there is like space to create experiences that is not just office space. And I think like that quote from this New York Times article saying that last month over 98 million square feet of office space was available in Manhattan. I have to say that doesn't mean anything to me in terms of like both because it's feet and also 98 million. I don't know what that is, like how much it is, but it is double the amount that it was in March 2020. And I think the point that people who are creating those new gyms that are also wellnesses and also co-working spaces, what they're saying is like the office space isn't coming back. Like the people who rented it before were tax lawyers, and I'm sorry to say, but tax lawyers probably are not going to rent more office space in the foreseeable future because it's an industry that can both work greatly from at home and also be replaced by AI. And so I think there is a lot of like planning that's being done in the real estate kind of environment, but also from a city point of view. What can we do to create more societal structure? What can we do to provide ability for people to meet? I think we discussed this before. You can see this both in New York as well as in London and Berlin and other cities as well, that cities are suddenly very lax about allowing restaurants to use a bigger portion of streets, or at least of pedestrian parts of the street. I think there is almost like a silent kind of like agreement that they are not kind of like trying to push kind of gastronomy even more to the side. I think because there's an actual problem for gastronomy because inflation and because tax laws are kind of like changing, at least in Germany, in that regard. But I think they all know that gastronomy is a place where people can actually like that's the easiest third place. People can meet at a pizza place or a coffee place, and they want to make sure that those keep existing because that provides the kind of public infrastructure for people to meet. And so I think like there is a thing in that space of private clubs and, you know, like the exclusive cryogenic stuff that's been around for a while. Like private clubs are nothing new for especially like cities like New York or London. But they have now suddenly a lot more space available to them. And I think this will create both new levels and of access and new kind of experiences will be provided. I think like this idea that you have like gyms or like basically like tennis courts or I don't know what pickleboard is, but that's apparently something that people playing in New York. But the fact that you have real estate in Midtown that is available for people to play pickleball and can be basically seen on street level, that kind of gives you an example of how the fabric of cities is changing.
Yeah, and I think exactly like to sum it up, I think there is a new. So the pandemic changed a lot when it came to real estate, and what we are seeing here, I think, is it's not clear where this goes from here. So there's openness to experiments, like all these like spaces there. Oh, we're trying this, we're trying that, we're doing experiments. We see none of this is completely like done like ahead, like with the perfect plan. Sure, you have to have a plan to get investors and to get like city governments on board, but everything has a certain like even like, oh, we're going to do this for 3 months. This is why everything is about pop-ups, like, because it's basically like it allows you, gives you the pink slip, or not the pink slip, but it gives you the allowance to just try something and then see where it goes. And I think, and this is why we see so many interesting combinations, or this dissolving of borders, because if you have to have, here's the 10-year plan and we're going to do a bit of this, a bit of that, it was like, yeah, that's not really like a good solid plan. What is this really about? But if you say we're just having this pop-up space for 3 months and we're going to try this, we're going to try that, it was like, yeah, okay, go ahead. And then all of a sudden we say, oh, it's already been 3 years and you're still there and you're still growing, and you, like the triangle space in Berlin, you're like last year had 275 events. Clearly you're hitting a mark here, and that allows them to then get buy-in from the government and from the university to do other things and even reach out more into the city.
You know what? It's kind of fascinating the way you described it. I think it's spot on. But like, in different way of looking at it is now city governments are a lot more accessible through kind of an agile and very short-term kind of point of view, while real estate owners and investors are kind of on a different level, because the reason why there are so many private clubs opening up and those gyms opening up in New York, the way they convince real estate companies to give them that much space, which is significantly bigger than it used to be in the past, is by accepting leases that are going for 20 or 25 years with extension clauses. So basically, in a way, they're committing themselves to about 30 years of lease for a certain space. And I think both approaches are kind of interesting because, A, they allow certain kind of experimentation on a level that usually doesn't happen. You experiment in the digital realm, but not in the physical realm. And governments are kind of, undecisive, and so they're maybe not wanting to commit necessarily to something that they are not quite sure yet about. And we hear stories from Frankfurt where certain things happen kind of like as a pop-up and then kind of become permanent as well. But at the same time, real estate investment, the way money works in that regard, they need a long-term plan to kind of justify the investment that went into building and the actual thing. And that's where they're really interested in the long-term commitments that they experience.